This goes without saying, but one of the most beloved 3D platformers of all time is Banjo-Kazooie. It took the principles of what Mario 64 did in regards to progression and level design, and totally reinvented a genre that itself was already a reinvention of a genre, and it left a legacy that to this day is still really strong. When people talk about Banjo-Kazooie though, people typically talk about the levels or the music, but they almost never talk about the bosses. At least other than the final one. Believe it or not, though it may seem hard to recall, Banjo-Kazooie actually did feature quite a few boss fights. Now, a while back, I did this type of video on Mario 64, and since then, I've always wanted to give Banjo-Kazooie the same treatment. So today, let's take a look at every boss fight in Banjo-Kazooie. Oh, and by the way, this doesn't happen too often, but every once in a while I get somebody down in the comments that's like, ew, your ears! And I don't care, but I just realized that my plug was hanging halfway out of my ear that entire take, but I guess what I'm not doing? I'm not refilming.
So, what constitutes a boss in Banjo-Kazooie can be kind of confusing, so I've come up with a very short list of criteria to determine what I think actually counts as a boss fight, and it basically comes down to two things. Approaching the boss has to initiate dialogue, which in my opinion separates a boss from a standard enemy, and it also needs to be a fight, meaning you need to physically damage them in order to beat them, so that rules out other NPC challenges like the sled race with Boggy and the eating minigame against Mr. Vile. With those rules established, let's check out all the bosses in the game. Hey, real quick, if you like the video, consider subscribing. It makes a staggering difference when you actually click the subscribe button, so if you like what I'm doing and you want to see more, click the button and you'll see when I upload. Alright, now let's talk about some bosses. One of the most iconic stages of Banjo-Kazooie is the first level you'll encounter, Mumbo's Mountain. It's a very straightforward stage with lots of charm and one of the most memorable tracks in the OST. After entering the stage, you'll only have to walk a very short distance before encountering the game's first boss, Kanga. He's a gorilla that stands atop a tree very close to the entrance of the stage, and his fight actually comes in two waves. At first, he's completely inaccessible as he's too high for you to reach him. This creates a situation where his boss fight actually has multiple layers to it, as there's a series of tasks you need to complete which each earn you a Jiggy, and the true boss fight only happens once the other tasks are completed. He tosses oranges at you from the top of the tree, and there's no way to actually damage him initially. Baiting him into hitting these switches on the ground with his oranges will earn you a Jiggy. Once that's done, you can then grab an orange from the tree and give it to this little monkey that's standing on a nearby stump. This earns you yet another Jiggy and also raises the stump up, creating a platform for you to get eye level with Kanga, but not before first encountering a molehill where Bottles will teach you how to use eggs. Once you've learned the ability needed to attack him, it's only a matter of standing on the platform directly in front of him and wailing on him while dodging his oranges in between. Only a few hits with the eggs and you'll take him down in no time. Once you pummel him with enough eggs, he'll accept his defeat and award you with another Jiggy. He's definitely a pushover, but most of this whole situation is just you trying to access him in the first place. Anyway, that's Kanga. Despite being only the second stage in the game, Treasure Trove Cove is probably my favorite. It's a perfect level 2 with just enough area to explore, and it's accompanied by one of the most infectious tracks in the whole game. It's one of my favorite aesthetic themes as well, being one of the most memorable beach-themed stages in a video game that I can think of. Unlike Mumbo's Mountain, Treasure Trove Cove doesn't try nearly as hard to lead you in an intended path, and instead lets go of your hand entirely and just kinda throws you into a big open stage and tells you to go crazy. The main boss you'll encounter in this stage is Nipper, a giant hermit crab, but due to the layout of the stage, you may not see him until you explore a bit, despite him being once again fairly close to the level spawn point. Initially, he's not super hostile, but Kazooie unsurprisingly gets a little mouthy with him, which then initiates the fight. The fight itself is pretty straightforward. Nipper will try to claw at you, but since he's stationary, he can't really damage you unless you approach him. To damage him though, you need to peck his eyes out with Kazooie's rat-a-tat-rap, which is easier said than done when he's actively trying to attack you. You kinda just need to let him do his thing and then wait for an opening to attack. In typical Nintendo fashion, you just need to hit him 3 times and then he retreats into his shell. Or so it looks anyway. Apparently he's just dead though, because once you, raid his home to collect the Jiggy waiting for you inside, he's nowhere to be found. Clankers Cavern is a pretty iconic stage, if only for Clanker himself. A giant, kind-hearted mechanical shark who acts as the garbage disposal for Grunty's lair. The entire level is basically a giant pool of murky water with different nooks to explore, as well as the inside of Clanker himself, who resides in the center of the stage. Now, to be perfectly honest, I really can't stand this stage. It's one of the very few stages in Banjo-Kazooie that I genuinely do not find any enjoyment in, but Clanker himself is memorable nonetheless. Down in the murky depths behind Clanker is a pipe pipe that's glowing green, one indication of what's to come. Once you swim through the pipe and make your way to the surface, you'll be greeted by one of the Snippet Mutants, a group of deformed Snippet enemies which serve as a pseudo-boss for the stage. Now, this isn't the only stage that does this, and there are a few other situations where the boss in a level is a group of enemies as opposed to one big one, but this is the first time you'll encounter something like this in the game. So this fight is actually super easy. Despite being mutated versions of the regular Snippet Crab enemies, they don't really function much differently at all from the regular ones in behavior or strength, and can easily be dispatched with a few beak busters just like the regular Snippets. Once they've all been defeated, a little dialogue box of what I guess is the final Snippet mutant admits defeat and tells you to claim your prize, a Jiggy sitting atop a platform in the center of the arena. Now obviously, Banjo-Kazooie isn't really known for having great bosses, but I've got to say this is definitely one of the overall weaker ones. Very forgettable and not at all challenging. A pretty lame boss fight for a pretty lame stage, if you ask me. A stage I frankly often tend to forget exists is Bubblegoop Swamp. I don't hate it, it's a fine level, I just don't think it sticks out to me as much as pretty much every other level in the game, even the few that I don't like, and to be honest, I even forgot this fight existed. In the middle of the swamp, you'll find a little island where you'll be confronted by a group of very angry yellow versions of the Flibbit enemies who are pissed that you trespassed on their island. They'll begin relentlessly spawning and attacking you, and they're a bit stronger than your normal garden variety enemies as they take a couple hits to defeat. Despite being pretty aggressive in their movement and the rate at which they spawn though, each time you take one out, it'll drop a honeycomb, so you're pretty safe during the whole fight. Once you manage to take out all 6 of them, they'll surrender a Jiggy. Very quick boss fight, really only lasts like a minute, but it's not too bad all things considered. Just kind of forgettable, much like the stage itself in my opinion. A level most people, including myself, used to despise is none other than Rusty Bucket Bay. I will say though, nowadays I don't dislike the stage at all, and in my opinion it's nowhere near as frustrating as a lot of people make it out to be. Anyway, to access this stage's boss fight, you actually need to clear a path, as initially the entrance to the boss is blocked by a big sheet of steel. If you climb the giant crane holding a big TNT crate, you can make your way to the base of the crane. Using Kazooie's beak barge on one of the buttons at the base will cause the TNT crate to fall and then explode once it hits the ground, clearing the path to the entrance. So you make your way back, jump in the hole, and you'll fall right into the arena where you'll immediately see the boss, a giant version of the boombox enemies. Now, this boss is basically a giant Russian nesting doll. If you attack him enough times, he'll split apart into 2 smaller boxes. Attack them enough times, and they'll do the same. Each time they split apart into smaller boxes, they'll have less health, but make up for it by having increased speed, making it harder and harder to attack them as they continue to split up. By the end of the fight, a total of 15 enemies need to be defeated, with the final one yielding a Jiggy once destroyed. Overall, this is a really simple boss fight, but honestly, it's one of the better ones in my opinion. There isn't really a whole lot of strategy involved, but you do need to be pretty quick on your feet, accurate with timing your attacks, all while keeping your cool because the fight can easily become overwhelming when there's too many enemies in the arena. This is a pretty good and simple boss, though technically you can just cheese it using the golden feathers. Click Clock Wood is an extremely ambitious level. It's a giant vertically designed forest-themed stage which has 4 different entrances, each representing the 4 seasons. As the seasons change, so does the stage. Enemies may appear or disappear, pathways may open or close, and sometimes you need to venture into one season to do something that will affect the stage in another. It's a very involved level and probably takes the longest to complete out of all of them. Unfortunately, it's probably the only other stage besides Clankers Cavern that I genuinely do not like. Don't get me wrong, it's definitely impressive and the music is really good, but I always dread tackling Click Clock Wood just because of how much of a chore it is to collect a good amount of the Jiggies in the level. One of the ones that isn't super involved and tedious though is the boss fight in the Zubba Hive. The Zubbas are a colony of bees that reside in a hive high up on the tree in the center of Click Clock Wood. They're guarding a Jiggy for Grunty, which is encased in a solid block of honey in the center of the arena, and once you enter the hive, they waste no time swarming you. A seemingly countless amount of Zubbas will fly at you pretty quickly and attempt to take Banjo down. The best way to dispatch them, besides a bunch of cheesing with the golden feathers, is by using the Rat-a-tat Rap in small quick bursts, staying alert and paying attention to each newly spawning enemy so you have time to react. This boss fight is really short and only lasts about 20 seconds, but those 20 seconds are pretty stressful and demanding as far as combat goes in this game. Defeat all the Zubbas and the Jiggy is yours. Overall, a pretty good boss fight. Okay, so although being the most epic and the only fight in the game I can truly call a real boss fight, I can't say I'm the biggest fan of the final encounter with Grunty. Once you've finished off the Furnace Fun minigame, which honestly probably counts as phase 1 of the Grunty fight, you'll make your way to the very top of Grunty's lair. Hop inside Dingpot and he'll launch you up to the roof where you'll finally confront Grunty once and for all. Now don't get me wrong here, this boss fight is definitely memorable and the music sets a very dire tone and you can tell the stakes are high. It's honestly a totally different vibe from the rest of the game and it really feels like a final boss. It's in the actual execution of the fight itself where I have an issue. Grunty has 3 phases. The first one, you'll need to chase her around the arena firing eggs at her whenever you have a window to get a good shot in. This part is pretty easy, it's kinda hard to aim sometimes, but it can be taken care of relatively quickly. It's not until phase 2 that things start to get pretty cumbersome. This entire phase of the fight takes place in the air. You need to use a flight pad to attack Grunty using the beak bomb. The challenge here mainly coming from the fact that hitting a moving target while you yourself are flying around is easier said than done, and by easier said than done, I mean a stressful pain in the ass. Also, you need to make sure to be careful where you aim the beak bomb because you can very easily torpedo yourself down, hit the ground, and fall off the stupid roof and have to redo the entire fight. If you're super careful and patient though, this phase is entirely doable. It's just frustrating and clearly easy to screw up, and it's really not fun at all. The final phase, though, is easily the most iconic and super satisfying to pull off, summoning the Ginginator. So Grunty puts up a force field to shield herself from your attacks, and 4 Jinjo statues appear in each corner of the arena. Each statue has a hole in the front that you need to fire 3 eggs into while making sure not to get hit by Grunty's attacks. Each time you activate a statue, a Jinjo will emerge and launch an attack at Grunty. Once the 4 statues have been activated, one final one appears in the center of the battlefield, with 4 holes that now require 6 eggs each. This is definitely the hardest part of the third phase because you need to juggle shooting eggs into the statue while often needing to stop to avoid getting hit or switch to the golden feathers when Grunty fires off the green fireball attack, which otherwise can't be avoided. It's very easy to get impatient and be overzealous with shooting the eggs, so you kind of need to juggle shooting the eggs and making sure that you're dodging the attacks. Once you activate the Ginginator, he'll deliver a series of very satisfying final blows, and Grunty will fall to her doom, ending the game. And in hindsight, setting up the next game. And that's all the bosses in Banjo-Kazooie. You know, as much as I love this game, the first Banjo game was really lacking when it came to the boss fights, but I do think what's here is enjoyable, and they even made sure to improve upon that in the second game. Not that I'm particularly a fan of those boss fights, but they at least made an effort to improve on something that the first game was clearly lacking in. Still though, what this game does have in lieu of traditional boss fights are still pretty fun Jiggy missions, and I honestly don't have too many complaints about them. They're pretty simple, but they're honestly all pretty solid.
Because once you raid his home to collect the Jiggy waiting for you inside, he's nowhere to be found. Note to future Gil, play the X-Files theme song here because you're gonna forget later, dumbass.
Hey, thanks for watching the video. If you liked it and want to see more, there's a couple other videos right there you can check out. And if you want to see everything I upload, subscribe and then tap the bell icon. And if you want to help support the channel, I also have a Patreon right down there too.